There comes a moment in life when you start to feel like your time no longer belongs to you, like your days are organized around schedules you didn't choose, like your exhaustion goes unnoticed. And many times, that moment arrives hand in hand with something that, on the surface, seems noble and loving: taking care of your grandchildren. Not as occasional help, but as a fixed routine, as an obligation, as if your old age had been assigned a role no one ever discussed with you honestly. When did helping turn into carrying a burden? When did you stop asking yourself whether you even wanted to do it? Maybe you tell yourself it's no big deal, that it's for the family, that this is just how life is. But something inside you slowly tightens. Your body feels it. Your mood does too. You find yourself postponing what matters to you, sleeping poorly, living by an agenda that isn't yours. And the most delicate part isn't the exhaustion, it's the loss of authority over your own life. Because when you don't set boundaries, others set them for you. Have you stopped to think about the price you're paying for staying silent? My name is Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. I am a father. I am a widower, and I learned some things too late that I now need to say out loud. Next, I'm going to share 8 lessons grounded in the practical philosophy of the ancient Stoics that helped me reclaim my freedom without breaking bonds, put my place in the family in order without guilt, and once again, inhabit my old age with dignity. Not to explain theories, but to open questions you may have been avoiding for a long time. 1. Clearly defining what you are and are not willing to do. There is a very common confusion at this stage of life, and I myself fell into it for years, believing that helping is the same as always being available, believing that saying yes once commits you to saying yes forever, and that's not how it works. Freedom doesn't disappear overnight. It slowly dissolves when you fail to draw a clear line. You don't lose authority because you grow older. You lose it when you don't say where your responsibility ends and where someone else's begins. Are you clear today about what you do by choice and what you do out of inertia? Let me offer you a simple scene, the kind that makes no noise. It's Tuesday afternoon. You're tired. Your body doesn't respond the way it used to. The phone rings and you don't ask whether you can, you immediately reorganize your day. You cancel your rest, your walk, your silence. No one forces you with words, but you comply anyway. And something important happens there. No one is using you. You are allowing yourself to be used because you haven't defined the limit. That's hard to hear, I know. It hurt me to accept it too. But it needs to be said. Thinking out loud is sometimes uncomfortable. I started by asking myself something basic. What am I willing to do, and how often? Not in abstract terms, not from guilt, but from my body and the real time I actually have. There are tasks you can take on once a week without a problem, and others that drain you. There are schedules you can respect, and others that disrupt your sleep. If you don't write it down, if you don't say it, the world assumes everything is available. Epictetus said that if you don't govern what depends on you, someone else will do it for you. He didn't say it to sound wise, he said it to survive with dignity. This is where a practical tool appears, simple and uncomfortable. Take paper and pencil and define in writing your yeses and your noes. Specific days, clear hours, energy limits. This is not a negotiation yet, it's an act of inner order. When you are clear, speaking becomes easier. When you are not, every request unravels you. Have you ever done this exercise, or are you still improvising your life around other people's emergencies? I want to pause on something that is often mistaken for harshness. Setting boundaries is not punishing anyone. It is protecting your place. It is saying, this is as far as I go. Beyond this point, I stop being myself. The hammer phrase is this, and I don't say it lightly. Whoever does not define their line ends up living someone else's agenda. It's not an accusation, it's an observation that repeats itself in many homes and many exhausted bodies. I remember a friend of mine, retired, a good father, a present grandfather. He never said no. He ended up with chronic pain, poor sleep, and a resentment he didn't dare to name. The day he finally set a limit, he trembled. He thought they would reject him. That didn't happen. What happened was something else. They began to respect him. Not immediately, not without tension, but it happened. Because respect usually comes after the boundary, not before it. This first step doesn't solve everything. In fact, it may open conflicts that were dormant. But without this initial clarity, there is no path forward. If today you don't know what you are and are not willing to do, tomorrow others will decide for you quite naturally. And that leads us to an uncomfortable question we need to face before moving on. Are you helping out of love, or are you holding up something that is already costing you too much? 2. Separating voluntary help from permanent obligation. There is a very thin line between helping and taking on a role that is not yours. So thin that many people don't see it until they're already trapped in it. Helping is a free gesture. Permanent obligation, on the other hand, is a structure that settles in without asking permission. And when that happens, something in the relationship becomes distorted. You are no longer the grandparent who accompanies. You become the fixed resource, the one who is always there, the one who solves everything. Have you ever asked yourself when you stopped choosing and started simply complying? I've thought a lot about this, especially in silence when the house goes quiet. At first, you say yes because you want to be close, because you love, because you feel you are still needed. And that is human. The problem appears when that yes has no expiration date, when no one asks you again, when the initial agreement turns into habit, and habit into a right others assume they have. That's when help stops being a virtue and starts becoming wear and tear. Picture a common scene. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are already taken before the week even begins, not because you chose them, but because someone else assumed them. If one day you say you can't, the reaction isn't understanding, but surprise, even irritation. That reaction reveals everything. When help is voluntary, no is accepted. When it is a hidden obligation, no is experienced as betrayal, and that should set off an internal alarm. Seneca spoke of generosity as something that is born from inner abundance, not from external pressure. He didn't say it to sound elegant. He said it because he knew resentment builds up when you give more than you can sustain. And resentment, when it goes unnamed, ends up damaging the very bonds it was meant to protect. Are you really helping, or are you avoiding a conflict you know will appear sooner or later? Here is a practical tool that many avoid out of fear: making explicit what was previously implicit. Calmly saying something like, "I can help in this way and at these times, but I can't take this on as something fixed." It's not a long speech. It's not a justification. It's a clarification. Separating help from obligation means naming things before they twist on their own. Let me share a brief story. A woman I knew well into her later years took care of her grandchildren every day. She said it didn't weigh on her. Her body said otherwise. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with anger, it was with exhaustion. At first, there was silence. Then adjustments. Nothing broke. What broke was the idea that she was available without limits, and that, although it created discomfort, restored something very valuable: her place as an adult person, not as a family cog. The lesson is this, and it's worth hearing slowly. What is not defined as voluntary ends up being demanded as an obligation. I'm not saying this so you harden yourself. I'm saying it so you don't lose yourself. Because when you accept an obligation that isn't yours, someone else stops assuming theirs. This point doesn't close anything yet. In fact, it may leave you unsettled. Because separating help from obligation means learning to tolerate the other person's discomfort without rushing to fix it. And that leads us directly to something many fear more than physical exhaustion: The difficulty of saying no without feeling like you are failing. That's what we're going to look at next. 3. Learning to say no without justifying yourself or feeling guilty. Saying no seems like a small word, but at a certain age it weighs like a stone. Not because of the word itself, but because of everything we believe comes after it. Fear of hurting, of disappointing, of being seen as selfish. And many times that fear doesn't come from what the other person will do, but from the image you have of yourself. The question is not whether you know how to say no. The question is why you feel you must explain your life every time you do. I've spent entire nights replaying conversations that hadn't even happened yet, rehearsing excuses, justifying my tiredness, inventing commitments, dressing up the truth so it would sound acceptable. And over the years, I understood something uncomfortable. The more explanations you give, the weaker your boundary becomes. Because the other person no longer hears the no, they hear the crack through which they can come back in. Have you noticed that? Or do you still believe that justifying yourself is a form of respect? Think of an everyday scene. They ask you to watch the grandchildren on a day when you're already exhausted. You say you can't. The silence on the other end of the phone stretches out. Then you add reasons, details, you almost apologize. At that point, the no stops being a boundary and turns into a negotiation, not because the other person demands it, but because you offer it. And that gesture, repeated over time, teaches others that your word is flexible, that your fatigue is debatable. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he should not feel guilty for protecting what was his. He wasn't talking about selfishness, he was talking about order. You are not responsible for carrying someone else's discomfort when you do what is necessary for your balance. Learning to say no without justifying yourself is accepting that the other person may feel uncomfortable and that this is not an emergency you need to fix. Here is a concrete tool, simple and difficult. Short, sober, repeatable responses. I can't today. I'm not able to do this on a regular basis. I'd rather not take that on. No long explanations, no excessive apologies. At first your voice trembles, your body tightens. That's normal. You're training a muscle that's been asleep for many years. How many times have you said yes just to avoid that momentary tension? I remember an older woman who told me something I never forgot. The day I stopped explaining myself, they listened to me for the first time. It wasn't magic. There were strange looks, curt comments, but there was also something new. Respect. Not immediate affection, respect. And that, in old age, is a deep form of nourishment, because affection without respect ends up being control in disguise. Every unnecessary justification weakens your authority. I'm not telling you this so you harden yourself, I'm telling you so you can hold yourself, because when you hold yourself, others learn to do the same. This point leaves an uneasiness hanging in the air. Saying no without guilt means accepting that you won't always be approved of, and that touches something bigger than a simple word. It touches the way you are using your time, your energy, and your life. That's exactly where we need to go next, before the clock keeps moving forward without asking you anything. 4. Reordering your own time as a vital priority. There is a silent trap in old age that almost no one names, believing that because you no longer work the way you used to, your time is worth less, that it is available, that it can be filled with what others can't or don't want to do. And without realizing it, your day slips away in fragments that belong to someone else. It's not that you do nothing, it's that you don't do what is yours. When was the last time you looked at an entire week and felt that it truly belonged to you? I realized this late. One ordinary morning, sitting in the kitchen, looking over schedules I hadn't chosen. That's when I understood something uncomfortable. No one had stolen my time. I had given it away, little by little, without resistance. Because I never put it at the center. Because I never treated it for what it is now. the scarcest resource I have. My body no longer recovers the same way. Energy doesn't renew itself by magic. Every poorly given hour weighs more than it used to. Picture a very concrete scene. You wake up tired and still you already know the day will be long. Not because you have plans of your own, but because others are counting on your availability. There are no empty spaces, no margin. And when the day ends, there is no satisfaction, only exhaustion. The problem is not helping. The problem is that your schedule has no core of its own around which everything else revolves. The Stoics insisted on something that is still uncomfortable to hear today. Living in accordance with nature also means respecting the rhythm of your own body and your own stage of life. You are not in the same season as your children. Pretending to function the same way is a form of silent violence against yourself. Reordering your time is not selfishness, it is realism. And realism at this age is a form of care. Here is a concrete tool that can change far more than it seems. Design your week first as if no one needed you. Place there your rest, your habits, your silences, your medical appointments, your walks. What sustains your body and your spirit comes first. Only afterward, if there is space left, do you decide how to help. Not the other way around. Doing it the other way around is living in a permanent state of borrowing. I met a man who reorganized his week this way. At first he felt strange, almost guilty. But after a short time, he noticed something clear. When he helped, he did so with better humor and less resentment. Not because he helped less, but because his life was no longer subordinate. Inner order began to reflect outward. Not without friction, not without uncomfortable silences, but with a new sense of dignity. Maybe this part makes you uncomfortable because it touches a direct truth. If you do not treat your time as a vital priority, no one else will do it for you. And that has consequences that are not always immediately visible, but they accumulate. Because when your day does not belong to you, your life begins to feel foreign. And there is still something more delicate that often breaks this newly recovered order: money. We need to talk about that with the same clarity, even if it feels uncomfortable. 5. Setting clear and sustainable financial boundaries. Money has a particular way of tightening family bonds, especially when no one wants to talk about it honestly. In old age, this topic becomes even more delicate because it often mixes with guilt, fear of losing affection, and the quiet idea that you no longer have the right to protect what is yours. Many people start by helping with small expenses and end up supporting problems that are not theirs to carry. Have you stopped to think about whether the money you give brings order or simply prolongs a problem? I have seen this up close. Older people who adjust their own well-being to cover other people's deficits, who postpone treatments, rest, or peace of mind so others don't have to reorganize their lives. And the most serious part is that many times no one explicitly asked them to do it. They offered on their own, believing that this was how they fulfilled their role. The problem is that money, when given without limits, stops being help and becomes anesthesia. It soothes the conflict momentarily, but makes it worse in the long run. Imagine a common scene. You get a call with a financial emergency, something that wasn't planned. You know you can help, but you also know it's not the first time and it won't be the last. Even so, you dip into your savings. You say nothing. You smile. But something inside tightens. It's not stinginess. It's intuition. It's the sense that you are holding up a structure that never corrects itself because there is always a cushion. And that cushion is you. The Stoics spoke of temperance as the ability to give without overflowing. It's not about closing your hand, but about not emptying yourself. Your future security is not negotiable. No one is going to come and support you if you compromise what you need to live with peace of mind. And saying this does not make you a bad mother, a bad father, or a bad grandparent. It makes you a clear-eyed adult. Here is a practical tool that is often avoided because it feels uncomfortable. Define financial help that is specific, with clear limits and no automatic continuation. One time, one amount, one explicit condition, and then silence. No follow-up, no rescue, no endless explanations. When money has shape and edges, it stops entangling the relationship. When it doesn't, it ends up governing it. I knew a woman who for years financially supported an adult child. The day she set a limit, she cried. He got angry. There was distance. But months later, something unexpected happened. He reorganized his life. Not because she pressured him, but because the permanent lifeline was no longer there. Sometimes a financial boundary is the first real act of respect toward the other person's capacity. This point often stirs a lot, because touching money means touching the fear of being left alone, of being rejected, of losing your place. But if you don't put this in order now, the wear will be greater later on. And there is something even deeper than money and time, something that often disguises itself as help, but prevents others from growing. That's what we need to look at next, even if it feels even more uncomfortable. 6. Stop rescuing and start holding others accountable. There are forms of help that seem noble, but over time become toxic. Not because they come from selfishness, but because they prevent the other person from taking their place in life. Rescuing means stepping in every time something falls apart. Holding someone accountable means stepping back at the right moment. And this difference is hard to accept because it touches a deep nerve, the fear that if you're not there, everything will collapse. Are you sure they can't manage without you? Or is it that you never let them try? Think about this calmly. Every time you solve a problem that isn't yours, you send a silent message. You say without words, "You can't handle this on your own, I'll take care of it." At first, that brings relief. Later, it creates dependence, and over the years, resentment on both sides. You for carrying more than you can, them for feeling, even if they never say it, permanently diminished. No one wins there. I remember a very specific scene repeated in many homes. An adult child shows up with a problem they've had before. It's not new. You recognize it immediately. Before they even finish speaking, you're already thinking about how to fix it. You give advice, make calls, lend money, cover time. Everything happens fast, too fast. There is no space for the other person to think, to make mistakes, to learn. The rescue avoids the immediate conflict, but freezes growth. Viktor Frankl said that you cannot spare a human being the weight of responsibility without taking away meaning. He wasn't talking only about great tragedies, he was talking about everyday life. When you remove the consequences of someone else's actions, you also remove their opportunity to put their life in order. And that, painful as it is to admit, is not mature love. It is fear disguised as care. Here, the practical tool is not to do more, but to do less. Withdraw a specific form of support and observe. Don't over-explain. Don't announce big decisions. Simply don't intervene where you used to. Active silence is uncomfortable. You feel useless, harsh, even cruel. But that silence opens a space that didn't exist before, a space where the other person has to take responsibility for their own life. I knew an older man who stopped solving his son's work problems. Nothing dramatic. He simply stopped calling, stopped pushing, stopped arranging things. At first, there was tension. Then something unexpected happened. The son started making decisions, some good, some bad, but they were his. And in that clumsiness, something new appeared in the relationship, an adult-to-adult dynamic. Maybe this unsettles you because it forces you to accept a difficult truth. You cannot live other people's lives for them without slowly erasing yourself in the process, and no one will thank you for disappearing. This point doesn't feel good at first, it feels empty, but that emptiness is necessary for something different to happen. Because if you are always there to rescue, you will never know what would happen if you weren't. And that question inevitably leads us to an even deeper one. What happens on the day you are no longer there? 7. Thinking about the day you're no longer here and acting accordingly. There is a question many people avoid because it seems harsh, almost in bad taste. But it isn't. It's an adult question. What will happen to them when you're no longer here? Not in abstract terms, not in a dramatic tone, but in a concrete way. Who will take care of the children? How will they organize themselves? What will they live on? Who will they call? If this question makes you uncomfortable, it's not because it's cruel, but because it exposes a dependency that still exists. I've thought about this a lot, especially on quiet nights, not from a fear of dying, but from the responsibility of leaving things in order. There is a huge difference between leaving chaos behind and leaving structure behind. Many people confuse love with always being available, but the most serious form of love is preparing the other person to not need you. Have you ever asked yourself whether your presence is strengthening or weakening those you say you care for? Imagine a future scene not very far away. You are gone because of illness, an accident, or the simple passage of time. There are no replacement grandparents, no last-minute phone calls. What remains will be what you helped build today. If everything depends on you now, everything collapses tomorrow. And that is not an act of love. It is a prolonged omission. No one wants to think their absence will be a problem, but it will be if it isn't corrected in time. The Stoics spoke often about death, not to obsess over it, but to bring order to life. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything is temporary, and precisely for that reason, one must act with clarity while there is time. Thinking about the day you are no longer here does not make you cold. It makes you responsible. It forces you to stop patching holes and start building foundations. Here the practical tool is uncomfortable but powerful. Ask yourself, and if possible say it out loud, what would they do without me? Not as a reproach, but as a diagnosis. If the answer is, I don't know, something is wrong. If the answer is, they would manage, even with difficulty, you are on the right path. The goal is not to disappear today, it is to stop being indispensable tomorrow. I knew a woman who stopped taking care of her grandchildren every day after asking herself this question, not because she didn't love them, but because she realized she was training them to depend. There were adjustments. Alternatives had to be found. Nothing was perfect, but something changed at a deeper level. She stopped being the invisible pillar, and her relationship with the family became more honest, less burdened. This point doesn't bring immediate relief. It brings a new kind of sobriety. It forces you to see yourself not only as a grandmother or grandfather, but as an older adult who also deserves care, starting with yourself. And when that inner order begins to settle, a different possibility appears. To transmit limits without fighting, without speeches, simply by example. That's what we'll talk about at the end. 8. Passing on limits and Stoic wisdom without confrontation. With its 4 virtues. There are people who believe that setting boundaries means sitting down to give long explanations, raising your voice, or listing old grievances. I've learned that it's usually the opposite. The firmest boundaries are the ones that aren't announced, the ones that are lived. They aren't transmitted through speeches, but through coherence. And that coherence, when it's real, ends up teaching more than any direct confrontation. What are you showing today through the way you live? Beyond what you say. Think about this calmly. Your children are no longer kids. They don't learn because you tell them. They learn because they watch you. They watch whether your words match your actions, whether you protect your time or give it away without order, whether you respect your fatigue or deny it, whether your life has a center or revolves around other people's emergencies. Something deep is transmitted there, even if no one names it. There's no need to argue to set a boundary when your behavior has already made it clear. Stoicism speaks of 4 virtues that, when truly embodied, bring order to any relationship without the need for collision. Wisdom, to distinguish what depends on you and what doesn't. Justice, to avoid carrying responsibilities that aren't yours. Temperance, to avoid overflowing by giving more than you can sustain, and courage to tolerate momentary discomfort without backing down, not as concepts, but as daily habits. When these virtues are alive, boundaries become natural. Let me offer you a simple scene. You stop being available every day. You organize your week. You say no when you can't without explaining yourself. You don't complain, you don't reproach, you don't threaten, you simply hold your ground. At first, there is confusion, then adjustments. Over time, something changes in the way you are treated. They no longer ask everything of you. They begin to ask you. That transition doesn't happen because of an intense talk. It happens because you stopped acting from guilt. Here, the practical tool is silent example. Don't announce big decisions. Don't justify every change. Do what you say and say only what is necessary. If they ask you, you answer calmly. If they don't ask, you don't volunteer explanations. A boundary doesn't need publicity, it needs consistency. And consistency is built day by day, even when no one seems to notice. I remember a longtime friend who never argued with his children about this. He simply started living differently, more orderly, more present with himself, less reactive. Over time, one of his children told him something that surprised him. Now I understand that I also have to get my life in order. He hadn't given a single sermon. He had simply stopped being the invisible support. Maybe you were expecting a stronger closing, a final phrase to put everything in order. There isn't one. Because this doesn't close with words, it's sustained through actions. Passing on limits without confrontation means accepting that you won't control the other person's reaction. You can only control your coherence. And that, even if it doesn't bring immediate peace, gives something deeper back to you. Your place, your dignity, your well-inhabited silence. We've walked a path that isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. We talked about defining what you will and won't do, separating help from obligation, learning to say no without guilt, reclaiming your own time, putting money in order, stopping the rescues, thinking about the day you're no longer here, and finally, passing all of this on without fighting, simply through coherence. These aren't isolated ideas. They are the same gesture repeated in different forms, stepping back into your place as an adult with dignity. If I had to leave you with one single reflection, it would be this. No one grows old in order to disappear in the service of others. Old age is not a stage for shrinking, it's a stage for refining what you give, when you give, and from where you give. When you live without clear limits, you exhaust yourself and create dependence. When you bring order to your life, you help better and you teach something more valuable than availability. You teach responsibility. My name is Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel exists to accompany you in the second half of life as you recover sovereignty over your body, your time, and your decisions. Here we don't promise easy comfort. We work to be stronger, clearer, and freer, even when that feels uncomfortable. If this message could help someone you love, share it. If you want to be part of this quiet, steady community, subscribe and leave the comment, "I am a Stoic," along with the country you're listening from. I read every message, and it matters to me to know from which part of the world this garden is growing. Next, 2 videos will appear that can accompany you in this process. Choose one, and we'll keep walking together.